Hi, everyone. You are tuned in for another episode of Embrace the Madness. Hello. How are you doing? I think I have some new listeners, so welcome, everyone. If this is your first time tuning in, hi, my name is Madeline. If it's not your first time, maybe your second or third or 30th, hello, welcome. Thanks for joining again. Things have been good. I've kind of taken a break from podcast, but I'm also finding myself craving more audio content. And I think a lot of us resonate, but sometimes we just don't want to be seen on a camera or feel like we need to be ready or anything like that. So we're just tuning in audio. And I think for a lot of us, sometimes it's not even like, it's just that there's so much stimulation, especially with frickin' video, and you gotta watch it and you gotta hear it. So your brain's like paying attention, and all these things are also happening in the background. But today I wanted to come to the pod to share a little bit of wisdom that I have integrated in my life over, I don't even really know, but it's like an integration, like we learn things and then over time they show up in our lives differently and we are embodying them differently. So what I wanted to talk about is how we can tap into our own mind, body, spirit connection for better living and just overall better well-being, because if we don't realize that all of these parts are connected, then we're kind of just like exploring a dark cave without a flashlight. And we are trying to find these solutions like, oh, well, let me try this. And it's almost like blindfolded throwing darts and trying to make a bullseye. And I think sometimes, we might find a trick that works or a habit that we can use that we enjoy or things like that. But if we don't really know exactly what we're trying to resolve or heal, it's like that. We're just kind of aiming in the dark. And so I just wanted to talk about this connection and talk a little bit just about it and probably why we haven't been taught about it either. And this is for, all humans, because we all have a body and we all have a spirit that's, keeping us alive, and we have a mind. Now, if we have brain differences or, surgical situations where your brain matter has literally been altered, then your experience is going to be a little different. And same goes for, my reference is an able-bodied person, but there are also people who might not have the same body as me and who might be living with different physical appearances or appendages, like we all differ in so many ways. And so, yes, my personal perspective is going to be from an able body, but I really do still believe that no matter what, you still have this connection. It reminds me of like a trifecta or like the Triforce from Zelda, but there is still these parts that work together to make a whole. And this is what I wanted to talk about today. So we all have this human body. It's like how we are here experiencing the world, how we are listening to this podcast, how we are showing up or going to work or, scrolling on social media. We need this vessel to be able to exist. And my brain's like going to the consciousness thing, but that's a separate conversation. So if you can imagine a triangle, 3 sides. One point is our mind, the next is our body, and the next is spirit. So even if you don't have a spiritual connection, or maybe you are atheist or agnostic, or, even if you haven't cultivated a spiritual connection or a connection with your higher power, you can still at least look at the mind-body connection. Now, I will say that adding the soul spirit side of the triangle definitely completes a trifecta. And I also share all this, having previously been an atheist and exploring my relationship with my higher power, and finally arriving at this place where I definitely know something intelligent created us, whether that is, a person or a being or whatever. Right now, I just view everything as like a higher consciousness of energy. So we can break it down kind of element by element. So mind. Now we have minds, we have a brain, and this brain is what helps us navigate this vessel. This brain is designed to keep us safe and to look out for danger and to protect us from any predators or things like that. Now, if we zoom way out and we go back to, early days of life, back when things were cells. Now, if you took a biology class, you know that there were eukaryotic cells and prokaryotic cells, and we don't even have to get into the science of it, but all we need to really know for this conversation is that life began very, 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 very small and very simple compared to what we experience today as humans. So if you ever studied the animal kingdom, it kind of goes based on complexity. And again, we don't have to get into the specifics. I know sometimes science can be complicated or very detailed or very complex in ideas. And without going on a tangent, I definitely feel like there is some, maybe not conspiracy is the right word, but it makes me curious why everyone hated math and science. Now, I loved math and science, and I feel like it was a way for my brain to make sense of everything. But anyways, so there used to be life that was very, very small. Now, if you study the early nervous system in organisms, brains didn't actually come till way later. There were just these parts of life that were looking for the light and the photoreceptors, and those were the earliest renditions of what a nervous system and what a brain would become. And all that to say is, over time, we have evolved as organisms to prioritize survival so that we can continue to reproduce and pass on our lineage. That's literally the biological kind of definition of life. And I want us to remember this. Our mind and our brain, its primary goal is to keep us safe. Now, we realize that as these humans, these complex organisms that have evolved to go to school and have jobs and pay taxes and all of these things, if you really look at the animal kingdom, it is so wild to see how organisms have evolved over time, just in terms of, simple organisms and all the way to these complex structures. And if you've studied the brain at all, by any degree, you know how complex our brain is. And, the cool thing is too that if you've ever heard of reptilian brain, that's just talking about our kind of primal instincts. And going back to what I was talking about earlier, the original brain was yes, to keep safe. And then we as humans evolved these outer structures like prefrontal cortex, things like that, and more emotional centers. We evolved that as we evolved as organisms. You know, if you think back to being a reptile or being an earlier stage, I mean, even a cheetah or something like that, like they are having their babies, they're feeding their babies, they're feeding themselves, they're making sure that they have everything they need, their nutrients, because they are trying to survive. Now, what's a predator for a cheetah? They have to survive without allowing themselves to die, and predators could also be humans. Predators could be diseases, all of these animals are trying to stay safe. And over time, and when I say over time, I mean like a long time, there are these humans who, yes, have evolved from a place of seeking out danger. And we still have to seek out danger. However, our brains kind of register the danger differently. Our brains still have this innate drive to identify predators, identify danger, prioritize survival, prioritize reproduction. But as you know, it's 2026 and we have all of these evolved ways of being. We don't live, most of us as humans in American society don't live in groups outside. There are people who still and have gone back to tribal living, and they're a little bit separate from this conversation, probably because they've already integrated their mind, body, spirit connection. But going back to our mind, we don't have the same danger that we used to, or that animals used to, or do. And so that's what our kind of more evolved structures are helping to kind of mitigate or, repress those, and maybe not even repress is a good word, but we just live with different danger now. And the thing is, since we still have those innate drives in us to prioritize survival and safety, and because we are humans, that have to send emails or send text messages or have difficult conversations with family or have a conversation with our boss, our brains are kind of oriented a little bit different. And so even though we have this innate part of us that's seeking out danger, it doesn't exactly match the danger that we are experiencing in our lives, So I'm thinking of what danger could be for us right now. Danger could be the fear of doing something bad at work and getting fired. The danger could be failing a test and failing out sophomore year of university. The danger could be having a really scary conversation that didn't really go well with your partner last time and you really needing to have that conversation. Do you see how all of these situations still pose a threat to our internal safety? But the thing is that these situations in our human life in 2026 don't necessarily mean death or getting consumed by a predator the way they do for animals or other organisms or insects. So are you able to kind of see the difference? Our brains are still detecting these as threats, as imminent threats, as holy shit, I need to get the fuck out of here because I'm about to get eaten. Even though that's not actually what's happening in our present reality. And so it's really learning about our brains and our minds and understanding these functions to better understand our relationship with our mind. And this is what really blew my mind just learning about in psychology. I did my concentration in behavioral neuroscience, so I had to take a lot of science classes. a lot of biology, a lot of chemistry, a lot of labs. And even, I've talked about it a lot of times, but my favorite class was animal behavior. And that was really just studying all of these, habits and tendencies of animals based on their own biology, about how they interact with life, about how they interact in community, and about how they're taking care of their young, they're communicating with mates, all of those things. And you really realize that humans are so similar. Now, I'm not going to say that we have the exact same brain structures, but we do have a lot of similar ones. Again, we have evolved those kind of outer cortex, outer cortical brain parts of us over time based on, us being mammals and needing to be close with our moms and growing in kind of communities and learning how to navigate that. But then we've also now live in this society where we are expected to have a career and go to work for 60 years and, work every day from 9 to 5. And that's just what we do. And so what's actually interesting is we have evolved as society and through AI and through technology faster than our brains could. And so we're kind of living this mismatch of not really having been educated about our brains or our minds or how our, that all works, but then also having these obligations and expectations to show up in our life. So going back to this mind-body connection and kind of building off of this physical, biological part of our brains I'm going to go whatever. So our brains are like this central, it's our central nervous system. It's how we make sense of information that we gather from our senses, from our sensory organs, things we touch, things we see, things we taste and we smell. So our brains are constantly receiving information based on our environment, like information we can't even fathom. Like we have so many freaking neurons in our brain that are constantly communicating. These neurons are receiving information, but they're also talking to each other, which is also talking to other parts of our brain to create this sense of homeostasis. Again, the fundamental thing is to prioritize survival. So just keeping that in the back of our mind whenever we are talking about all of this. So our minds are actually communicating with our bodies. And this is kind of bringing in that second point of the triangle, the body connection, the mind-body connection. And there are these things called neurotransmitters, which are like chemicals that like norepinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, acetylcholine. These are all different neurotransmitters that are constantly moving through our body. And this is like what I love, weird nerd out on, is like kind of like a math equation. Like our bodies were so intelligently designed that it needs a certain amount of this to do this, or it needs this amount of chemical to do this. But yeah, there's always like a formula. There's always a formula for things. What's crazy to me is our muscles actually operate on this like electric current communication. And so your brain's actually sending these neurotransmitters to your muscles to move or to contract, or, like it's fucking mind blowing, just like the complexity of us as organisms, and to be able to see and to connect all of these different processes in our brains. So when you realize that our minds and bodies are constantly talking to each other, like there is no disconnect, well, then You've got freaking thoughts and cognition. And cognition is something that is basically just saying like that we think, we have these thoughts, we have this narrative, we have thoughts. And there's also metacognition, which is like thinking about thinking and thoughts and thinking about your thoughts. And then, that kind of separates us from a lot of organisms out in the wild because we have evolved language and, many languages. We've just evolved all of these different things because we are humans and not, we're still learning about how animals think and how animals feel. So another thing to keep in mind is that kind of like I was talking about the formulas, if you remember,
mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
If you remember ever making one of those cell diagrams, with the cytoplasm or whatever the heck, homeostasis, that's another important term. So homeostasis is like balance, things staying in balance. It's also, they kind of talk about thermostats in that way too. Like if your body is running a fever, if you've got an illness, your body is like, we need to get this unidentified thing out of our body. So what can we do? We're going to raise our temperature to try to get more blood flowing. We're going to try to get this shit out. It sends all of its little things to go pay attention to it, to go see what it is, to go, scope out the situation. Well, certain things need a certain environment to thrive. And most often our bodies need this homeostatic environment, this very balanced, like kind of 50-50 thing where it's just like a flat line. Well, just like a thermostat turns on if the temperature goes up past what you've set it on, our bodies kind of go into this mode too, where they're like, oh, something's out of balance. I got to do this and I'm going to fix it. And then, hey, we're back in balance now. Oh, this other thing happened. I got to do this and I got to send this. So then, oh, okay, we're back in balance now. And our bodies are constantly in these cycles of let's get back to homeostasis. Let's get back to homeostasis. And going back to kind of the environment, if an environment is imbalanced, or has too many of something, it can begin to become toxic. And if we zoom in, kind of going back to that cell image, if a cell is in a toxic environment, then that creates imbalance for the cell. And that could also mean like the cell doesn't have what it needs. These organelles are not in a good environment. And, my brain's like thinking of all these things. So without getting too confusing, if you've ever heard of osmosis or diffusion, these are those ways that things communicate inside the cell and outside the cell. So imagine if you have a cell in like a bowl of dirty water. Because of the way the cell is, it notices how dirty the water is outside. And because there's a higher concentration of dirt or whatever the fuck in the outside, that starts coming inside. And this could create a toxic environment for the cell, which means that the cell doesn't have what it needs to stay alive. So, what's a cell going to do if it doesn't have what it needs to stay alive? There's something called apoptosis, and it might say, hey, I can't survive anymore. I need to just turn into goop and let the rest of the body use my nutrients for whatever it needs. And the whole reason that I bring this up is because the way we think can be toxic or not toxic. And if we have these thoughts, for example, I'm a failure, and that kind of sounds dramatic. We are actively thinking and keeping that thought loop on repeat. And what we need to be aware of is that even our thoughts have energy. And if we're like thinking these kind of detrimental thoughts, if you think you're a failure, what do you think like telling that over and over and over to your body is going to do? It's going to create like a toxic environment. And if you think you're a failure, that probably like creates all of these other little beliefs cascading, like I'm a terrible person, I'm bad, or, we all have our own thoughts that happen. Now, if these thoughts are not conducive to life, these thoughts do not bring life, if these thoughts do not create life, then it's kind of in an interesting binary if you look at it from science. So if it's not creating life, then it might be tearing life down. And that is the thing about science and biology and the study of living organisms that truly blows my mind and is so inspiring is like it's always seeking optimization, it's always seeking life, and it's always seeking ways to grow. I mean, you've seen a fucking flower try to grow in cement in between the cracks on a sidewalk. Like you've seen, like if there's sunlight and water, that shit's gonna try to grow. And I think that's so beautiful. Like beautiful in a way that capitalism hasn't touched it yet. And this narrative that we need to do more and be better and blah, blah, blah. So hopefully things are making sense, but going back to this mind-body connection, the way that you think is connected to how your body functions. And if you have specific thoughts about your body, this is what I struggle with for a lot of like, oh, I'm overweight and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, how do thinking those thoughts make me feel? Probably sorry for myself, probably not good. And it's like, imagine what the feeling of not feeling good and not feeling like supported feels. Like, think about those feelings, these thoughts that create these emotions that travel through our body, these emotions that travel as like chemical processes through our bodies that's living in our nervous system, that live in our muscles, that live in our hearts, that live in, these vessels. And I mean, anything. If we start looking at our thoughts as like, are they life-giving or are they life removing or tearing down? Like, do they support life or do they not support life? And you could always say there's a neutral thought, and yes, there's a neutral thought, but when we really get down to this connection of thoughts and emotions, we begin to see how this plays a role in our biological function. It's just so important that we have this awareness of how our mind and our body are connected, of how our emotions are literally, these feelings based on these thoughts that we're having. And I had been studying neuroscience, and then I started learning about Buddhism, which gave me a really interesting and unique framework for how to think about thoughts and how to think about, just how our thoughts are so pivotal, but then also how our thoughts are connected. So one of my favorite examples is like the second arrow. And it's this whole idea that, if you have a thought, I am overweight, and well, actually, let's switch it up. If someone comments on your picture and says you look fat, and the first arrow is that person making that comment, because that's rude. And if you didn't ask for their opinion, and they gave it to you and they said it like that, then yeah, that's rude. And that the second arrow comes in when your thoughts start coming in, like, oh my God, does everybody else think I'm fat? Oh my God, they're right, like blah, blah, blah. And those thoughts literally start saying, oh God, everyone's gonna hate us. We're gonna be excommunicated from the tribe. I might die. And like, those are those thoughts that get into our reptilian primal brain. And it's like, fuck, we're in danger and we got to do something. So it's like, you get that comment and you then notice that your heart starts beating really fast. And you notice that you're starting to get really angry and you're also starting to cry. And it's like, because of that comment, all of these different biological processes started happening. Do you see how immediate that reaction of your heart started beating was? Like, your body literally scanned your environment and found danger. And because your body is so wired to keeping you safe, it started these cascade of processes happening, sending messages to your heart. Hey, we need you to start beating faster because they might have to run. We need you to just send all of this energy over here so that we can go and avoid this danger and just forget about it. And I haven't even talked about the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system yet, but if you are well-versed in nervous system stuff, it's really popular on the internet now. We have fight or flight and we have rest and digest. And there's also another one, but for the purposes of this, it's like this kind of like a switch. Like, if one's on, the other can't be on. So it's like, it's either this one or that one. And in that example, when you got that shitty comment and your heart started beating fast, when your body's like, hey, there's danger, we need to go, that's fight or flight. And fight or flight is this situation where your body is registering danger and you either need to fight the danger or you need to flee the danger. And what's happening also in that process is that because you are fighting or fleeing from danger, you don't have time to improve or take care of your body. So rest and digest, parasympathetic, is actually like, if you could imagine, like, you're like a cat who just ate his food and it's quiet in the house, so you're going to go take a nap. And while that cat's taking a nap, it's chilling, it's relaxed, it's not searching, scanning for danger. The cat's nervous system knows, based on its surroundings, that it is safe, so it can actually relax. And the heartbeat can start slowing down. And it can close its eyes. And these organs can do all these processes, like digest the food that it ate. And it can, what else? Send any repair that's needed. It can start repairing organs, or it can start building muscle, all of these things. But then, like, a branch snaps and the cat like wakes up in terror and it's like, oh shit, what was that? It's like, at that moment, the fight or flight kind of activates and it's like, well, there's potential danger, so now we need to stop. And the crazy thing is that our bodies can't go into this phase of healing and restoration while we are seeking danger. And this is like the biggest mind-body connection, because when we, especially as women, are living in danger, feeling like there's a threat of danger, our bodies can't take care of themselves and we can't digest our food, and cortisol is like flooding our brains. And it's like, we are so like, what am I thinking of? We're just kind of like a fog is over us. Like, we can't actually be present because there's this like undercurrent of scanning for danger. And this is also another aspect where, like, this is where trauma starts to join the conversation. And it's like, for so many of us, and for Black and people of color, there is this trauma that is so hard to override. And honestly, to be freaking alive right now, like, you have had to go through trauma. Like, we're living through trauma every day with the way that our world is. So it's like we are constantly in this battle with outside forces to take control of our nervous system. And that's why this conversation is so fucking important, because we are seeing it every day. We are seeing it in the news, in the files, in these conversations with these like, we are just seeing all of these reasons to get triggered and to pull us out of our parasympathetic nervous system, if we can even like get there. A lot of us struggle to even get there. A lot of us struggle to even find time to relax and to breathe. And it's like we have so much in our outside world that is fighting for our attention, and that is like grasping for, there's just, imagine all of those arrows. And to top it all off, if you haven't like specifically studied these areas, we're not taught. I wasn't taught growing up about my brain or about how these things work or about neurotransmitters. It's like not until I went to college and learned all of these things and were able to put all these pieces together and was reading all these books. And it's like, not everybody can do that. Not everybody has the privilege to do that. And not everybody has the time. Like, where we find ourselves right now is crazy. And I want to validate you, because it's like, you're not the broken one. Like, it's not your fault that you're living in fight or flight, and it's not your fault that these things are happening. And I just want to share this information with the people who could really benefit from it, because I think our world would look so different if we all knew that taking a few deep breaths could actually change our life. And I don't say like, oh, you just need to meditate, because that's not what I'm saying. I'm sharing the information that, can also be found in books, but I'm sharing information of how this all integrates and how we can apply this to our lives. And it's really just so sad. And that's kind of where my conspiracy side comes in, because it's like, what is this? Some big conspiracy to keep the knowledge from the people and to keep these people living small and scared and stressed out. And I don't want to think that way. Part of me thinks it's like things were just kind of happening, and then it was like becoming this thing, and nobody did anything to step in to stop it because they realized that they could benefit and make a lot of money from it. But this isn't a podcast episode to get into the conspiracy, but conspiracies are welcome. This is to provide you with knowledge and tools that you can use to begin to look at your life differently. And I haven't even started talking about the spirit connection, but the mind body is the primary, because that is what a lot of us, know and perceive. I think the spirit point of the triangle can be a little tricky, because a lot of us have grown up with religion being traumatizing. A lot of us have been hurt by religion and hurt by God and hurt by whatever our parents or caregivers told us. And like, we don't want a relationship with God. We don't want that. I don't believe in that. And I want to validate you, because I think that, we're all on our own journeys. And for me, I wasn't really raised religious, but I grew up basically just kind of neutral. Like, I didn't think there was anything out there, and I wasn't really taught to believe in God or Jesus or things like that. And I also have a podcast episode about it, about my spiritual journey also. But what's interesting is I have this kind of science rational brain that looks at life through this lens, but then I also have grown to connect to my spiritual side, and I love tarot, and I love astrology, and I love crystals, and I love this connection to something bigger than me. And Also psychedelics and electronic music. Like there's this whole dimension, there's this whole world that isn't really known to us in this 3D like that we experience. But that doesn't mean those dimensions don't exist. Now, if you have kind of, rehabilitated your relationship with spirit, or maybe you were lucky enough to never have lost it, or maybe you are able to have this relationship with the higher power and just kind of not allow the religious piece to demonize it. So when you realize that we are like these smaller pieces of this bigger piece, this bigger puzzle of consciousness, you begin to see this connection. And, that's what a lot of researchers are still trying to figure out. Like, what is God? What is God or source connected to humans? Why do we have a soul? What is consciousness? How do we measure consciousness? These are these questions that are boggling researchers because everybody's just kind of guessing. Like, we're still all guessing, There is so much indigenous wisdom that has stories and themes of things that they believe and live in communion with. There are so many indigenous tribes that have never lost their connection with nature because they know it's all connected. And yeah, it's just fascinating, like realizing that, one of the first easiest connections we have to our higher power is through nature, through this intelligent design, which we are, going back to being organisms and being these organisms that feed off nutrients and have these biological processes. Like, we are nature. And so this nature that so many indigenous peoples are connected with and supported with and live in harmony with, have these deeper connections with their source and their higher power and their understanding of the inner workings of the world. And it's just fascinating when you nurture yourself spiritually. And it's fascinating how this spiritual connection can help our bodies and our minds. And for me specifically, remembering this connection helps my mind not to spiral. And this connection to the divine helps me remember that there is, this higher intelligence or this higher consciousness that is making sure that life is continuing. And going back to that kind of like drive of nature of just like optimizing and always like creating more life. And this is something that I want to continue to talk about and, get clear and even draw pictures, but like, and this is just things that I feel like I know without knowing how I know, but like just consciousness being this constant, infinite, just like ascent. And I don't really know where it's ascending to. And it's kind of reminding me of Soul a little bit when they're like going on this bridge to like the great beyond. But going back to the trifecta. So when we are connected to something bigger than us, it like provides us context. And right now I'm thinking about when I was depressed. Like, I was so depressed that I literally couldn't wake up to go to college. I would wake up at 4 p.m. every day. I drank a lot. I had just like ended a relationship. I mean, college was hard. I was studying fucking physics and I was like, I cannot do this. But I did not have any sort of like cosmic connection. Or at least I wasn't practicing it in that moment. And like, when you get depressed, you're like, why is everything happening to me? Why is this happening to me? Like, what's wrong with me? And it's like, If you have this connection to the divine, then you know that you also have divinity within you. And so you understand that nothing's wrong with you. And you understand that you are a part of nature and nothing's wrong with you. And that is like also what helps me spiritually too, is like this life that our society has created for us is not in alignment with nature. They've actually tried to remove nature. We're literally depressed because we are living so against our true nature. And, I don't claim to know everything. I'm just sharing what has resonated with me, and I'm still deepening and developing my own relationship with spirit. But I will just say how much connecting to spirit has changed my life and helped me forgive myself and have compassion for myself and know that I am a part of nature living in this non-natural world. And I was just thinking about Louise Hay, but there's a lot of critics of people like Joe Dispenza or Louise Hay who it's like, oh, well, you can't just think away your problems. You can't just think away your ailments. And it's like, but if you are living in a society that's effed up and that's not natural, and that's leading you to think certain things, that's causing a toxic environment in your cells and in your body, how would they not be connected? How would they not be? You don't see animals out in nature depressed. You do see the ones in the zoo depressed, the ones with zoochosis. And why are they depressed? Because they're living in a fucking box. Because they're not tapped into their outside world. They're not tapped into their community. They're like living in a box with one other animal. And that's literally how we have to start looking at ourselves as humans. There has been like this surge of people connecting to their feral side, and I'm thinking of like music festivals and EDM and stuff, but like everyone is like craving this feral wild side because that's who we are. That's who we are. We're animals. We're animals with evolved brains. Like, I don't really know what else to tell you. But when you start looking at life from this lens, things start clicking and things start making sense. And when you realize how much power you have through this mind-body connection, your life changes. Your ailments start dissolving. Your brain starts getting kinder. The words you share are kind, and they're not like hateful towards yourself, and they're not hateful towards others. And you find that when you actually tap in to listen to your body, you can like move a certain way, and you can do a certain stretch, or you can like begin to notice when your body's calling for something, especially when it's calling for rest. Because I think so many of us push through these feelings of tiredness and push through like the pain, and we just have been taught to medicate to the pain. And it's like, maybe if we just listen to our body or our soul, we could address this differently. And there, is another conspiracy that comes in. I don't want to believe that, but I do know that these industries have made so much money on the way they tell us we need to solve our problems. Thinking about all the people on antidepressants right now. And that's not to say that some people don't need like biological chemical support, because I totally see that and honor that. And I know that taking medicine for your mental health is a journey. But I also know there are so many ways that you can support yourself through listening to your body and getting those thoughts kind of like out, getting those bad thoughts out, and like really paying attention to how you're talking to yourself, and connecting to nature and allowing those things to benefit you, like going for a walk around the block, sitting in a field, just listening to birds for an hour. Like, those can provide so much healing for us that society doesn't tell us about. And we have to, go to our homework, or we have to go to work. I don't have time to do this. And it's like, We're literally running away from these things that can help us. And I don't blame you. I don't blame anyone. I blame the society that we have been conditioned to believe in and grow up and continue to play a role in. Hopefully this conversation has been eye-opening for you, because it was eye-opening for me and literally life-changing. Like, now that I've been able to embody all of these different aspects, like, I just feel good in my body and I don't feel depressed anymore. And, that's not to say that emotions don't come over me because they do. But when you learn how to listen to your emotions as messengers and not shove them away or take a pill about it or have a drink about it, like, they don't get stuck in our bodies and we can allow things to move. And our bodies are these fluid organisms that move and that can function properly because we are actually taking care of them the way we were meant to. This kind of stuff is what I do with my clients. Like, this is what we look at. A lot of times when you can look at your little trifecta, your mind, body, spirit trifecta, if there is an area of your life that needs more attention, usually addressing that can help the triangle be more connected. And if you are looking for support in this way, I would love to help you, because I feel like I have gone through this myself and I have navigated these different problems, but also like incorporated and integrated all of this knowledge that I have to really allow me to live this life where I feel good in my body and I feel divinely supported. And I feel like I have a grasp on my like overthinking mind, which do we ever? But if you are looking for support, like with this specific type of healing in your life, please DM me. My DMs on Instagram are open, and these are conversations that I love to have because I understand how beneficial and how powerful they can be once you integrate them in your life. And I also want to invite you, if you are looking for deep, intimate support, I have a 12-week program called the MAD Method. And one of the first things we do is really kind of get an assessment of where you are in your life and where you are in your trifecta. And I want to do another episode, but really checking in with yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, because these are all important parts of how you function as a human being. And yes, there's more details on the MAD Method in the bio and also on my Instagram. So please DM me. I would love to hear what you thought about this episode. I would love to hear what you found out about your own mind, body, spirit connection. And I look forward to having even more deeper conversations about this shit that matters. So with that, I will leave you and I will talk to you soon. Bye.